past, it seems, is always present in Iran. What happened here one Sunday morning 20 years ago still has the power to inflame old slogans and to rouse old demons. These people have gathered to remember an extraordinary event which the world came to know as the Iranian hostage crisis. On November the 4th, 1979, hundreds of Islamic students occupied the American embassy in Tehran, taking the diplomats hostage and beginning a siege which would topple a president and compel us all to recognize a revolutionary new force, radical Islam.
هدف اصلی بچه‌ها در واقع از اشغالگران جاسوسی این بود که فریاد مظلومیت خودشون رو، فریاد اعتراض خودشون نسبت به سیاست آمریکا در اون مقطع از زمان به دنیا اعلام میکنن.
To actually come onto the grounds, take the embassy hostage, and take the diplomats hostage. I mean, this was the worst part of all. It was like being raped.
There were times I was sure that none of us were going to come out of that thing alive, given the volatility of what was going on and their propensity for violence.
It was interminable. 14 and a half months can be an eternity. And I saw no way out.
For Americans and Iranians, one man stood at the center of the crisis, Mohammad Reza Shah, King of Kings, for more than 3 decades the absolute ruler of Iran. Over the years, the Shah's brutal secret police terrorized all opposition into silence. A dash for modernization left millions in poverty. But resentment was building most of all about the Shah's profound relationship with America.
ما تمام جنایت‌های رژیم پهلوی رو وابسته به امریکا می‌دونستیم و نه تنها ما دانشجویان بلکه همه ملت چنین احساسی رو داشتن. ما احساس می‌کردیم که شاه و پدر او همیشه از حمایت‌های امریکا برخوردار بودند و به حمایت‌های او بود که شاه مثل یک سگ زنجیری واقعاً در کشور به مردم اون ظلم رو روا می‌کرد.
Iranians had never forgotten or forgiven 1953, when America had staged a military coup to overthrow the democratic government of Mohammad Mossadegh. The Americans had then established the Shah as their faithful bulwark against the Soviet Union.
When the military coup happened, many of us were so sad and just cried for what Americans they did in my country. Mossadegh was trying to introduce democracy in our country, and through that military coup, Americans they actually suffocated the democracy in Iran at a very critical embryonic state.
In Washington, there was a failure to understand the vast degree of suppressed hatred that had been caused by our bringing about the collapse of the Mossadegh government. That was Iran's chance to become democratic. We screwed it up, and we bragged about it.
By 1978, Iran was in rebellion. As the economy failed, the opposition grew bolder, and the Shah was constantly challenged on the streets.
At that time, I was a student and we were involved with demonstrations against the Shah. The demonstrations began within the universities, the intellectual circles. We had demonstrations practically every week. This continued and it became a popular movement, a demonstration which involved millions, essentially, of the people.
By now, the US Embassy in Tehran was one of the biggest in the world, with a staff of 2,000. Despite the gathering rebellion on the streets, United States support for the Shah remained unwavering, while his insatiable appetite for sophisticated weapons made him the world's largest importer of American arms.
The prevailing wisdom in Washington and in the embassy was that the Shah could handle it. I changed my mind, I think definitely, after Black Friday in early September.
On Friday, September the 8th, 1978, hundreds were killed in anti-Shah demonstrations. It was the trigger for revolution.
I think we didn't understand that the Shah was not Iran. We addressed the Shah as if he were the country. We didn't realize that this was a country with politics of its own, however suppressed they might have been.
We have never been comfortable as Americans dealing with religious fervor. We simply do not comprehend it.
Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini had become the unique focus of opposition to the Shah and America. For 15 years, Khomeini had been exiled by the Shah, but never ceased his bitter denunciations. In October 1978, Khomeini arrived in Paris.
He was a very strong man. He was very smart. I didn't have to repeat things to him twice. He didn't have any idea of what's going on in the world. It's very funny. Among all the leaders of the contemporary revolutions, he was the only one, comparing with Mao Zedong, comparing with Ho Chi Minh, comparing with Castro, with Tito and others. He was the only one, didn't know what's going on in the world.
امام برای ما تبلور آزادی ملت بود، تبلور استقلال ملت بود، تبلور قیام مردم بود علیه ظلم رژیم طاغوت.
On January the 16th, 1979, defeated in the war with his own people, the Shah fled Iran. The stage was set for the Iranian Revolution and for Ayatollah Khomeini.
اون لحظه چیزی که بود عشق و اون انتظاری بود که همه به واقع داشتن و اگه مردم میگفتن یا همه ما میگفتیم امام به قلب ما و وارد باند فرودگاه قلب ما شدن، به واقع اون موقع شاید اغراق نبود و امام به واقع وارد قلب‌های ما شده بودن و اون لحظه شاید زیباترین لحظه هست که برای خود من وجود داشته، اون موقعی که امام وارد فرودگاه شدن و از پلکان هواپیما به پایین اومدن.
احساسی که یک ایرانی میتونه پیدا بکنه وقتی که بعد از سالهای دراز تبعید به یک وطنی برمیگرده آزاد، پر از شادی و امید.
That moment, I have the feeling similar to when our first son was born in the hospital. I went to visit my wife. They gave the child to me, the newborn baby. I have the same feeling. And that was a new birth, something really new, a new creation. So it was the moment of excitement, but at the same time, the moment of concern for the future.
You have to remember that there had never been an Islamic revolution before, and the revolution that took place was probably the most powerful popular event in recent, perhaps all history. Certainly it was a more imposing expression of the public will than the Russian or Egyptian or any Chinese revolution. I mean, it was a massive outpouring.
Khomeini returned to his spiritual home in the holy city of Qom to ponder the way ahead for the revolution. Between hints of democracy and rumors of religious rule, the future path of the revolution was unclear.
In Iran, everything is like the great decoration they have of the mirrors. The thousands of little glittering pieces of glass, all of which reflect a different side of your face. Nothing is clean and clear. Everything is the mirror game.
The weeks following the revolution were a testing time for Iran and for the American embassy. Armed gangs from rival factions roamed the streets, skirmishing for control. In February 1979, the embassy narrowly survived a ferocious attack by left-wing guerrillas.
And we are not opposite with the American people. We are opposite with government, in all American government in all over the world. We are opposite. And we want to kick out, all imperialism, all imperialism from this country. We want this country for ourselves.
Khomeini's foreign minister came to the rescue.
I was able to control the situation. I thought that it was the obligation of the new government to protect the security of the foreign citizens, and therefore I went there and resolved the problem and apologized for what has happened.
Thousands of Americans poured out of Iran, and the shattered embassy struggled to come to terms with an uncertain future.
The old embassy staff was being sent out very rapidly, and within the space of just a few days, we went from a major embassy, one of the larger of the American embassies, to about 15 or 16 Americans. I stayed because I wanted to. It was exciting. It was a revolution. You do not get to see revolutions often. This was history, and even though it's dangerous, people want to be part of history.
In the spring of 1979, Washington decided to try and re-establish the American embassy in Tehran. Around 70 diplomats with a taste for adventure were recruited for the challenging job of doing business with the revolution. To head the embassy, a seasoned diplomat was dispatched to hold the fort until an ambassador was appointed.
I was ready to go. It was a challenge, and most Foreign Service officers looked for that opportunity to serve in the midst of the challenge. It was exciting. I had served in Tehran before, 25 years earlier. I liked Iran. I liked the Iranians.
I was between jobs in the Foreign Service and looked for something that would, quite frankly, earn me some brownie points at that point, because very few people were willing to go out there. But also, I'd been a student of Islam. all my life, and the idea of seeing, for a short stretch, a revolution in action was very challenging to me.
And when I came there, of course, the buildings were still there. It was still 27 acres, squat in the middle of Tehran, a big American presence, but beleaguered this time. We called it Fort Apache because it was very heavily defended, or prepared to defend itself against any kind of demonstrations.
We were still in the Cold War. We really weren't looking at Iran most of the time. We were really thinking about, what are the Soviets going to do? So to a large degree, we were saying, well, let's try to keep a stable relationship with Iran going. And perhaps we were a little too idealistic about this.
By early summer 1979, the embassy was beginning to relax again. Old contacts were re-established. Embassy parties welcomed Iranian guests.
I remember a dance and the music, and I remember teaching my secretary to waltz. But a little bit St. Petersburg, or Petrograd 1917.
I was having some success in getting our position across to the revolutionary government, that we had accepted the revolution. I was dealing, of course, with the provisional government.
What we saw as normalization with the new provisional government, with the revolutionary government, the students and a lot of clergy, a lot of the ultra-militant, would see as the destruction of the revolution.
For those radical clerics, the evidence that the American embassy was again moving closer to the Iranian government seemed ominous. But now came the prospect of an even more disturbing development for Iran's radicals. For 8 months since he left Iran, the Shah had been moving from country to country in an increasingly desperate search for a safe haven, and he was now seriously ill with cancer. In October 1979, the Shah asked to enter America for medical treatment.
I had been asked several times that summer by the U.S. government how I would feel about the admission of the Shah into the United States if necessary. We risked, I said, the possibility, that's all I said, of another attack on the embassy of the kind we'd experienced in February.
It was pretty much the president's whole foreign policy team arguing he had to be let in. President Carter resisted and finally said, what the hell are you guys going to do if they take our people hostage over there? And nobody had a response, and nobody, I think, could even conceive that would happen. And President Carter went on and let him in anyway, reluctantly and kind of begrudgingly.
So, as so many people, weak leaders do, when confronted with conflicting choices, they select both of them. And he decided to keep the embassy open and to let the Shah in at the same time, a fatal mistake.
After the Shah was admitted into the United States, there were several days of sheer quiet. That was just, of course, the calm before the storm, but we were really fooled by that. I think we thought that perhaps the Iranian populace was willing to accept it.
And Bruce said, well, it looks like we've survived another confrontation with the Iranians after the admission of the Shah. And I said, I don't agree with you. I said, I think the longer it takes for them to take some action, the more precipitous will be that action. They're planning something.
In deepest secrecy, a group of about half a dozen students were in fact beginning to plan a sit-in at the U.S. Embassy. One of the leaders was Ibrahim Asgharzadeh.
تصمیم گیری ما برای اشغال سفارت در حقیقت برمیگرده به واکنشی که ما نسبت به رفتار امریکا میخواستیم نشون بدیم. ما احساس میکردیم که و اینطور فکر میکردیم که امریکا در حقیقت با بردن شاه به داخل امریکا در فکر به هر حال توطئه چینی علیه انقلاب هست.
The students feared that once again, as in 1953, America would reinstate the Shah and destroy their revolution.
به دست آوردن یک نقشه از سفارت امریکا و کنترل رفت آمدهای مقامات امریکایی برای ما خیلی مهم بود. ما که این اطلاعات رو نمیتونستیم از وزارت خارجه یا دولت ایران بگیریم، باید اینها رو توسط کنترل سفارت از ساختمان‌های اطراف به دست می آوردیم. برنامه‌ریزی برای جذب نیرو، برای توجیه دانشجویان و برای سازمان دادن به این حرکت شاید چیزی حدود 2 یا 3 هفته بتونه انجام بشه.
The student leaders shared their plans only with the radical cleric Ayatollah Khomeini-Ha. Khomeini-Ha was a close confidant of Khomeini and his special link to the students.
برای رفع نگرانی خودشون مایل بودن قبلا به اطلاع امام برسونن و از حضرت امام تأییدی برای این حرکت بگیرن که من مانع از این کار شدم و اونها رو قانع کردم که این تصمیم رو به اجرا در بیاورند و بدون اینکه امام مطلع باشه.
ما این اقدام رو به عنوان یک عمل سیاسی اعتراضی انجام میدیم. اگر کار خوبی بود مورد تایید ایشون قرار میگیره و اگر کاری بد بود طبعا ضررش به عهده خود ما خواهد بود و ما مسئولیت این در حقیقت ضعف و اشکال رو به عهده میگیریم.
I'll tell you the funniest thing. I woke up that morning, I walked out on my balcony, and I looked out over at the embassy, and I actually said, oh, it's a great day to be alive.
November 4th, 1979 started out as any other day in Iran. That morning, it so happened to be the anniversary of a riot in front of the university, and Iranian students were killed. So there was going to be a march on November 4th, and we figured, well, they were passing by the embassy, then going to the university, which was not far from there.
The hordes were already out there screaming, Morgue America, and Death to America. And at first this demonstration seemed to me to be an interruption, that it was going to really mess us up on getting our timetable down. You know, it's amazing how you don't worry about the right things at the wrong time. And then when it happened very quickly. It started out as a typical demonstration, only instead of just stopping in front of the embassy, these hordes then started to scale the walls.
طبعا من هم جزو اولین گروهایی بودم که وارد سفارت شدم. نحوه تسخیر سفارت امریکا در حقیقت به این صورت بود که اون در اصلی توسط یک تظاهرات و هجوم دانشجویی گشوده میشد. دانشجوها داخل سفارت می اومدن و بعد در بسته می شدن.
And literally as the gate was being pushed open by Iranians, I was running back to the Chancellery building and was the last person allowed into the Chancellery building right as they streamed through the gates, which were by that time broken open. They also at that time began climbing over the walls.
And then a Marine suddenly came down the hall shouting, everybody downstairs, there's a break-in. And I looked out and there was a sea of people coming at the embassy.
I was scheduled that morning to go to the foreign ministry. I took my deputy and one of my security officers along with me.
We had gone down to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that morning to talk to the ministry about embassy security. And we were there in the meeting when my radio goes off, and it is our driver, embassy driver, who's down in our car, who says, you better come down, I need to talk to you. So I go on down and excuse myself from the meeting. Highly unusual for high cops to do that, and go down. He said, we got a problem. The Marines need to talk to you. The embassy's under attack.
It was a hell of a state of affairs. And of course, here I was in the foreign ministry. My compound was way across town. I wasn't there.
یعنی ما خیلی میترسیدیم و فکر میکردیم که به احتمال 99% به احتمال زیاد فکر میکردیم که امریکا به ما حمله خواهد کرد. یعنی نیروهای امنیتی و گارد سفارت.
Took my coat off and put a flak jacket on, a helmet on, grabbed my shotgun, grabbed my holster and revolver, grabbed a whole supply of ammunition and tear gas.
یک برنامه ریخته بودیم که در صورت زخمی شدن دانشجویان و یا به شهادت رسیدن بعضی از اونها رو سر دست بگیریم و به سمت دانشگاه تهران که محل تجمع مردم به یک مناسبتی در اون روز بود ببریم و مردم رو تحریک کنیم برای برگشتن به سمت سفارت امریکا و درگیر شدن با نیروهای امنیتی سفارت.
My instructions there were not to fire except if they were an immediate physical threat themselves, danger of loss of life.
We were the first office to be taken over. And my secretary was so frightened that she opened the doors so quickly, there was no way to stop people. They blindfolded me, and as soon as that happened, must have been some sort of heavenly sign going on. It started to rain. You know, I'm kind of a dramatic person. I sort of accepted it. You know, this is what life is going to give me. You know, rain, blindfolded. I'm going into hell right now. I don't know what's going to happen to me.
ساختمون اصلی سفارت تنها ساختمونی بود که مقاومت میکرد و هنوز ده‌هاش باز نشده بود.
اونها هم خیلی ترسیده بودند. از لحظه‌ای که فهمیدند که ما داریم از طریق پنجره‌ها شکستن شیشه‌ها وارد ساختمون میشیم و با وسایل ساده‌ای مثل دستمال خیس در حقیقت در مقابل گاز اشک‌آور اونها مقاومت میکنیم، ترسیده بودند.
Once we saw the situation sort of deteriorating, we started destroying codes, we started destroying sensitive documents and just things that we felt should not fall into the hands if the embassy happened to be taken over.
از صدای تخریب اونها و کار کردن دستگاه‌های خردکن ما پی بردیم که پشت دیوار باید اتفاقاتی بیفته.
They brought our security officer to the vault door and they said that if we did not open up, they were going to execute him. Well, that's pretty serious.
The decision was made somehow to surrender. Nobody was really in charge, you see. The preparations for or the anticipation of this just was non-existent.
I, along with everyone else, was scared, very frightened, but even then had a little bit of sense of bravado. I mean, as they came in the communications vault,
Kevin noticed a cassette on the desk, and he rushed back to get that to destroy it.
And as I was stuffing cassette tapes into the shredder, they caught me doing that and wanted me to retrieve them, actually grabbing my arm and pushing my hand into the shredder.
Later to find out it was, I think, an Earth, Wind, and Fire tape of mine. So he risked his life for Earth, Wind, and Fire. They lined us up against the wall. And they sort of put our hands behind our backs, and we were told to keep our heads down.
When they put a gas mask bag over my head to use as a blindfold, that was, it was pitch dark. And all kinds of thoughts were going through my head at that immediate instant and for the ensuing several hours.
And then led out and downstairs with the guard telling me, where to step, where to put my feet. and then whispering, Vietnam, Vietnam.
And they started to interrogate me. I felt that it doesn't seem like this is going to be a short stay in Hotel Iran.
I personally was on vacation on the eastern shore of Maryland, and I heard about it, and I got a call from the Situation Room, and they told me that our hostages had been taken. And my first reaction was, oh my God, this is exactly what President Carter had predicted.
People were assembling from different places all over Washington, and it was quite an amazing site, actually. They'd taken over one room of the State Department Operations Center and had had telephone lines open that were, you could hear, and we had lines open to the embassy. And at that point, when I got there, they were still holding out. And then one after another, the phones went dead.
And then I heard the noontime news that said the embassy had been seized, and I knew we were in bad trouble.
By the evening of November 4th, 66 American diplomats had been taken hostage and the embassy occupied. Trapped at the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Bruce Langan urged Foreign Minister Yazdi to resolve the crisis as he had 8 months earlier.
Yazdi, in effect, said, we warned you that there would be problems when you admitted the Shah. He was clear on that point. But he also said that they would cope with the situation. Don't worry, we've got the situation under control. In fact, the last thing he said to me that day, approaching midnight, when he had to go off to a cabinet meeting, look, we'll work this out by morning.
I was with the CIA guy, and we weren't supposed to talk. He was a little faster off the mark than I was, and he said, you realize, don't you, we're hostages. And so I thought about that.
I was taken outside. The hordes were already out there screaming, death to the hostages. So it was like an official, formal announcement that, hey, this isn't your typical sit-in. This is a serious situation. And I'll never forget thinking that, gee, this thing could go on for a day or so, and we're really going to be behind in our work.
We tried to make things difficult for our captors. We sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic, or Rally Round the Flag. That was it. Rally Round the Flag, we sang. And you see, we didn't know how to be hostages yet. We hadn't accepted that reality. But our captors didn't know how to be captors.
اتفاقا قرار شد در اون زمان من اینا رو جمعشون کنم توی یکی از ساختمان‌ها و لیست برداری بکنم از اینها و اسمشون و شغلشون رو ملیتشون رو یادداشت بکنم. این کار رو هم انجام دادم. و
امریکایی‌ها دو گروه شده بودند. یک گروهشون که در حقیقت محافظ سفارت امریکا بودند، با پرتاب گاز اشک‌آور و در حقیقت حفاظت از ساختمان‌ها می‌خواستن جلوی دانشجویان رو بگیرند. یک گروه اونها هم که وظیفه داشتن که در شرایط بحرانی اسناد طبقه‌بندی شده سفارت رو نابود کنند.
They were threatening to kill me and my colleagues as well if we didn't open the safes. Russian roulette, interrogation.
What they wanted to know is what documents we had destroyed. They wanted to know the combination of the safe. They wanted to know who we worked for if I was a spy. They wanted to know just anything that we would tell them.
Who controlled this? Who was responsible for that? And I particularly felt that that was none of her business. So I said, I had earlier looked around the room and I had seen a bottle of scotch that the embassy cook had that he should not have had in his drawer. And in my best Persian, I asked her if she wanted a drink. that was just the worst possible thing anybody can do. But I think it was my desire to say, I'm here, I'm not going to be pushed around.
I didn't even have a uniform over there, but they found my military identification card. Then it was Katie bar the door. Oh, you must be CIA, you're a colonel in American Army, you're in a lot of trouble.
استقرار اونها در اتاقهای خواب یا در سالن‌هایی بود که ما میتونستیم اونها رو تحت کنترل قرار بدیم. زنها رو جدا کردیم، مردها رو در کنار هم گذاشتیم. این آرایش اولیه در حقیقت آرایش غیر تخصصی بود، یعنی همه اونها رو کنار هم نگهداری کردیم.
I was wakened during the night, that first night, and one of the guards said, "Quit signaling your colleague with your eyes." And I said, "What?" And my eyes must have been moving in REM movements or something, and they were absolutely convinced, I don't know how, in the small darkened room, that I was sending Bill all sorts of secret signals with my eyes. But so we were all blindfolded after that.
Marooned at the Iranian Foreign Ministry, miles from his embassy, Bruce Langan settled down in the reception room, which would become his prison for the next year.
Spent the night trying to find occasional moments to sleep on French furniture, elegant furniture in that room. Tossed and turned, of course, all night. Didn't get much sleeping.
It was cold that night. I shared that evening with one of the colonels, the U.S. military attachés. We spoke for several minutes, and we both said, "What are we doing what are we doing here? Why is this happening to us? Perhaps this is a dream that we'll wake up from."
For student leader Ibrahim Asgarzadeh, the morning after the occupation was an uneasy time.
ساعتهای اول ساعتهای سختی بود و به خصوص اینکه نمیدونستیم که با چه باستایی از طرف محافل داخلی و رهبر انقلاب روبرو خواهیم شد. دولت موقت بسیار ناراحت شده بود از این قضیه و بلافاصله واکنش تندی نشون داد.
اینکه خب برای یه ملتی فخری نیست که برود یه سفارتی در مرکز کشور خود اشغال کنه و یه دی رو بگیره به گروگان. ننگی هم هست، عمل شجاعانه نیست این. پس من از دید من مثل این که دوباره این ضد انقلاب برگشت. ما امریکا رو از در بیرون کردیم، حالا از پنجره بازگشت، دوباره شد محور دیگه. همه چی در رابطه با سفارت امریکا.
The embassy takeover immediately exposed the bitter divisions within the Iranian Revolution. For the secular politicians, it was an embarrassing problem. For the radical clerics, it was a unique opportunity to consolidate their power. The day after the occupation, the students' own demands were clear. Return the Shah from America to face trial. But the students found themselves at the center of a fierce struggle for the future direction of the Iranian Revolution. Pawns in a bigger game. Their link to that bigger plan was Ayatollah Khomeini.
ارتباطات دانشجویان با مسئولان و مقامات عالی رتبه کشور نقش واسطه خوبی رو من میتونستم بر عهده بگیرم، از جمله ارتباط بین دانشجویان و شخص حضرت امام.
On November the 5th, the day after the embassy takeover, the provisional government collapsed. There would be no rescue this time by Foreign Minister Yazdi or other secular politicians. Khomeini's triumph was complete Soon afterwards, Ayatollah Khomeini declared his total support for the students. He called the embassy occupation the Second Iranian Revolution.
Khomeini saw this as a gift. Khomeini was ingenious enough to understand that the takeover of the embassy was a perfect ploy to consolidate power in Iran. By taking over the embassy, he not only destroyed the provisional government of Iran, but he also destroyed the United States' power within Iran.
From this point, Khomeini took personal control of the hostage crisis. His vision for the future of the revolution was now linked to the holding of the hostages. They would stay until that vision was fully realized.
یعنی ما اساس برنامه‌ریزی و سازماندهی نیروهامون برای مدتی کمتر از یک هفته بود. در اطلاعیه اولی هم که منتشر کردیم این رو به اطلاع مردم رسوندیم. اما در عمل ما در واقع درگیر کاری شدیم که هم مردم و هم رهبر انقلاب از ما میخواست که اون رو ادامه بدیم. و همونطور که گفتم ما بعد از چند روز تبدیل شدیم به گروهی که در حقیقت باید روی دوش خودش یک حرکت اجتماعی عظیمی رو حس میکرد.
There was a constant confrontation with the West, and there was a constant attempt on the West through different channels to somehow undermine the movement.
The West has a different conception of the word hostage. They think hostages are a group of innocent people captured by terrorists. First, these are not innocent people. They are spies. They were preparing to destroy our country.
اطلاعات بسیار ذی‌قیمتی بوده. هم در رابطه با توطئه‌هایی که امریکا در این اغتشاشات می‌کرده و هم در رابطه با قبل از انقلاب.
It became clear that we were in a very much more complicated situation because all the embassy files had been captured. I think one of my memoranda was one of the first documents that were broadcast, and I thought, if they have this, they will make us look like spies in their eyes, and that's exactly what happened. Gave them some kind of moral standing that they utterly lacked beforehand.
We should have had better destruction facilities than we had for sensitive documents. Having had what we had, which was largely equipment that cut the sensitive paper into strips, which we engaged in very actively in the first few hours after the demonstrations began on November 4, those strips were the kind that in the hands of very zealous, determined young Iranians could be pieced back together strip by strip over hours and days and weeks, and the damaging evidence was there to support their claim that we were a den of spies.
That evidence also enabled Khomeini to eliminate many of his opponents inside Iran. In Washington, President Carter struggled to handle the crisis. Carter quickly froze Iran's multi-billion-dollar assets in America. But there were other urgent concerns for the president.
I don't think they knew how to handle this in a family sense. They were very good at briefings, but it tended to be in State Departmentese. And this was incomprehensible to many people. They did, however, invite the families to Washington, which I think was a very good step. It was a good step for both sides, although it was extremely difficult the first time.
At one of the first meetings, I brought pictures of the children and gave them to President Carter and said, please remember, whatever you decide to do, that their father is being held. We'd very much like to have him come home alive. Always keep that in mind, and I gave him the pictures. So every little thing that you could do that gives you a little bit of power makes you feel a little bit better because you're so powerless in the situation.
I am not going to take
any military action that would cause bloodshed or arouse the unstable captors of our hostages to attack them or to punish them. I'm going to be very moderate, very cautious.
That was very nice to know that the president was immediately with us and worried about us. The only thing, though, the president said, I don't think it's going to last very long because these are religious people. And, I just trust that they will be kindly and humanitarian and let them go. And I looked at him, I said, Mr. President, I lived 9 years in Muslim countries, and they're not going to let them go tomorrow, I can tell you that.
Around the room, there were situated these guards who were all dressed in black, and they had black hoods with automatic weapons in their hand. And in the farthest corner of the room, there was this French provincial desk with a short man sitting at that desk. They marched me over there, sat me down, and wanted me to write down the history of my infamy. And I refused. I said, no, I won't do it.
They had 2 or 3 different interrogations teams that worked me over. I was beaten. I was hung by my wrists, marched into trees, and, of course, with a blindfold on. Sleep deprivation. I was tied so tightly that when they weren't interrogating me, they'd tie me up like a pretzel and come in about every 15 minutes, give me a couple of good swift kicks, pull me to my feet, and ask me a bunch of stupid questions. And that was deliberate. I mean, that was to try to confuse me.
He said to me that I'll count to 10, and by the time I get to 1, if I don't get an answer from you, I'll just shoot you in the head. I won't shoot you in the head, but my friend will shoot. And my friend had his cold barrel next to my head. People don't realize that the count from 10 to 1 can take an interminable period of time when you're about to die or you expect to die. And at the count of 7 or so, I'm saying, now what am I supposed to do here? I want to be a good American, but I want to live too.
I figured I was finished. It was all over. It was just a question of how I was going to go out. And it had nothing to do with loyalty to the United States of America or some patriotic approach to anything. It was just my own personal self-esteem. I was not going to give in.
So it got down to 4, 3, 2, and 1, and then I decided, well, I think the better part of valor in this case is to say that, is to answer as directly as possible whatever needed to be answered without giving the store away.
After about 3.5 weeks, they gave up on me. And that was a very dramatic moment, really. One of the team chiefs of the interrogation teams just got so frustrated and angry with me because I wasn't really giving him any information, and he banged on his desk and said, "You must be the dumbest colonel in the American Army." And I felt so good about that.
Once I said yes, the gun was lifted from my head, and I signed my name, and they sent me back upstairs. I think I was in total shock for days.
به صورت عادی و طبیعی رفتار خشنی نبوده است، ولی من از اینکه در مواردی گروگانها سعی کردن برخلاف دستور دانشجویان حرکتی انجام بدهند، در این گونه موارد اگر از ناحیه دانشجویان هم متقابلا رفتاری شده است که برای گروگانها ناخوشایند بوده، این رو به طور کلی نمیتونم تکذیب کنم.
کار گروگانگیری کار نسبتا خشنی بود، ما هم این رو میدونستیم، ولی ما ناگزیر بودیم نسبت به رفتار امریکا واکنش نشون بدیم و فکر میکردیم که واکنشی غیر از این شاید اون اثر لازم رو نخواهد داشت.
اگه لازم باشه خیلی کارا رو خواهیم کرد.
For the students now at the center of a huge international media story, the humbling of their American captives was a powerful reward.
در واقع گروگان‌های آمریکا بیشتر از این دلگیر بودن که اصلا چرا کارتر براشون کاری نمیکنه. یه افسر ارتش آمریکا اونجا بود، میگم ما 2 روز دیگه میریم. یه ماه بعد که بهش دیدم گفتم چرا نرفتی؟ گفت من اصلا نمیفهمم دنیا چی شده.
طبیعی بود که گروگانگیری توسط امریکایی‌ها اصل میشد و به عنوان محور تبلیغاتی قرار میگرفت. برای ما افراد گروگان خیلی مهم نبودن. کافی بود از این گروگان‌ها همشون آزاد بشن جز 1-2 نفرشون، یا حتی همشون آزاد بشن ولی ما سفارت امریکا رو در اختیار داشته باشیم و بتونیم حرفامون رو با دنیا بزنیم. گروگان‌ها یه ابزاری بودن در دست ما.
2 weeks after the takeover, Ayatollah Khomeini ordered the release of black and women hostages. Islam has a special respect towards women, he said, and he stated that blacks live under American oppression and tyranny. 1 black man and 2 women remained hostages under continuing accusations of espionage. Now there were 53 American hostages still held in Tehran. Shut away in small groups or in solitary, they were moved constantly to different locations on the embassy compound and around the city. Most had no idea what had happened to other hostages.
From November 4th to March 17th, 1980, we were not allowed to talk to each other. So any information that we received that was passed around had to be done on the sly. It could not be done openly. We couldn't talk, so we didn't know.
We spent days in this place. It was solid darkness, where kind of our lifestyle began. The lifestyle of changing everybody's shirt, wearing other people's pants. We all looked like we were disheveled messes.
We were like animals in a zoo because they would parade people through there to watch us, to look at us. And I don't know if they were charging admission or not, but that was kind of an eerie feeling, to be in a situation like that.
Regularly we could hear volleys being fired off, and I suspect it was to keep the mob at bay. And they told us, we're protecting you against the mob. But we didn't know. I didn't know whether or not, and in what order, we were being shot consecutively.
Amid hints of trials and executions, the year drifted to a somber conclusion.
At this moment, there are 50 Americans who don't have freedom, who don't have joy, who don't have warmth, who don't have their families with them. And there are 50 American families in this nation who also will not experience all the joys and the light and the happiness of Christmas.
No letters, no telephone calls, absolutely nothing at all. And I don't understand what the students fear as far as letting the hostages at least contact their families, let the families know that they are fine and not being hurt.
I want my daddy home.
At Christmas 1979, an invitation arrived from Tehran for 3 American priests to visit the hostages.
I think it was a very simple matter of wanting to try and bring a little Christmas cheer to people who were badly in need of it. And when the Ayatollah said we didn't ask for it, but when the invitation came, it just seemed like a very obvious one to accept.
This was a party, and I shaved. Everybody else was, didn't give a damn. So we were led downstairs, and there in his red Oxford robe, I think, was William Sloane Coffin.
Then I decided, we'll all pray together. So I said, let's all stand, let's all pray, and let's hold hands. So this student who had been giving us a very hard time was holding hands with 1 Marine on the left and 1 Marine on the right. And I was praying pretty powerfully. I think I was getting a real visit from the Holy Spirit.
Whether we live in Iran or whether we live in the United States, whether we sit in captivity or whether we number ourselves among the captives, come into our hearts this night. Tell us that we all belong one to another in this world.
And at that, the tears began to pour down the cheeks of this very tough student leader, and he couldn't wipe his face because a Marine was holding his right hand and another Marine was holding his left.
William Sloane Coffin had visited my wife before Christmas, and he had whispered in my ear that Barbara and the children are well.
And I recognized that this must be the father of the boy I just met. And when I shook his hand, I said, I'm going to have to do one better for you. I'm going to have to give you a hug from your small child.
You know, I had very strong ambivalent feelings about hearing those things. I wanted to hear that everybody was well, but it also was a very depressing thing. It worked, I think, against me. I wanted to keep up, the vigor of hate, and there was this message of love and hope, and it was very hard to take at that time.
My son never wanted to look at the pictures of his father on television. He had said to my mother, and this was like well into the crisis, didn't they go psh, to Daddy? Wasn't it over? And for a 2-year-old, over is better than having and not having.
In a little town in Pennsylvania, a patriotic American set up an avenue of flags to remember the hostages and added a new flag each day.
I think I could actually visualize time. Seconds were like grains of sand that kind of built up and became minutes, and minutes became hours, and hours became days, and days became weeks, and weeks became months, and much to my chagrin, years became years. I never expected that it was going to last that long.
The relationships did not stand up as well as perhaps they should have. And I think a lot of us, some people irritated the hell out of me, and I irritated the hell out of some other people.
We spent a lot of time just getting to know one another, and eventually, after several weeks, getting to irritate one another. Frankly, when you spend 24 hours a day with somebody, you get on each other's nerves.
I was in a room with a couple other people and had to spend 24 hours a day on a bed. Now, that sounds very restful after what I'd gone through before, but it gets a little old, and there was no talking allowed or anything.
We were 3 of us in a double bed. One had almost uncontrollable diarrhea, and the other was a terrible snorer. In fact, I talked to his wife about it afterwards, having shared this guy's bed, and we both did this gesture. I had a bad back at that moment, so I was provided with a chair, and I sat in the chair, and then one of my roommates made it clear they wanted their turn in the chair, so we had these little moments.
Imagine any husband and wife that think they have a good marriage, chain them together and put them in a 5x7 cell for a few months and see what you have left at the end of that. Probably not much, but we didn't have any choices.
We were from different backgrounds, and as another hostage said, we exhausted each other.
Today, Ayatollah Khomeini's modest house is a shrine. But for 444 days, this simple room was the heart of power in Iran, and the place from where Khomeini controlled the hostage crisis. For the first 3 months of 1980, negotiators came and went, initiatives blossomed and withered. Americans and Iranians met in great secrecy, elaborate schemes were evolved. But always, the fate of the hostages was in the hands of one man, Ayatollah Khomeini. The hostages stayed.
You could tell the level of fear by the smell that people give off. People really smell when they're afraid. And I remember we were marched into a little room once, and our three of us sat there. The place just stank. That acrid, terrible smell of fear. We thought that this was a waiting room for execution, you see.
4th of February, 1980. That was one of the real low points and yet a high point of the entire experience.
The door burst open, and in came a group of guards with masked on.
Carrying rifles and automatic weapons. We were taken out and lined up against a wall, spread-eagled.
Stripped down to our underwear. And they marched up and down, snapping at the elastic.
And they told us to put our hands up against the walls and not turn around. And they were clicking their little guns behind us.
It was click, click. And those whose Farsi was better than mine recognized the commands for a firing squad.
Hazar Khan, get ready. And then Hadaf show, take aim. And then nothing.
You're thinking about, hey, the next sound you hear would be the bullet entering you.
And then they went back and started the fire commands over again. And they did that for about a 25 or 30-minute period without ever giving the actual command to fire.
February in Tehran, it can be very cold indeed. And the thought occurred to me, being an amateur historian, I remembered that on the day of his execution, which was I think it was early January 1649, King Charles I insisted on wearing a second shirt so that he would not tremble from the cold and people might think he was afraid. So that thought, me shivering away, King Charles I shivering away, both of us being executed.
And I remember one of the military guys just turning around and saying, if you bastards are going to shoot me, then you're going to shoot me front. You're not going to shoot me in the back. And they kept telling him to turn around, and he was quite defiant.
And then they were giggling and laughing. And about that time you thought, well, you sorry bastards, you're just trying to rattle our cages. You're trying to get into our heads.
Finally, we were marched back into our little cells, and I remember letting out a yell of joy. We'd won. We had faced them down. We hadn't shown what used to be called the white feather. And that was important to me.
There wasn't a single soul that pleaded for mercy or begged or let out a single sound. By then, each one of us had made a conscious decision that if we were going to die there, we were not going to beg them or give them one last spectacle over which they could gloat. And so when it was over and we were moved back into our cells, I did some real serious thinking. I thought, hey, you've been in combat. You've been with some pretty neat people. But you've never been with anybody better than these guys.
In Washington, Jimmy Carter's presidency was itself becoming a hostage to the crisis. By March 1980, the president was besieged between Khomeini's intransigence and America's frustration.
We were held hostage. We considered ourselves the outside hostages, as opposed to the inside hostages. But of course, our lives were governed by this extraordinary event as much in its way as our family members in Iran.
We set up the organization of FLAG, Family Liaison Action Group. We just felt we had to have an organization through which we could funnel our concerns to the State Department instead of the other way around. College students were throwing dog food at the Iranians And I said, this is not helpful. I said, well, tell them to tie a yellow ribbon around an oak tree. It just snowballed. It was incredible.
By the spring of 1980, President Carter faced some hard decisions.
From the very beginning, though, the president had commissioned the feasibility studies to a rescue mission. And we'd had these on-again, off-again kind of possibilities of their being released. We began to get, reports back from the Pentagon that they knew where the people were, and we had surveillance of the compound to some extent, some intelligence from Tehran, and there began to be developed a rescue plan that looked difficult but not impossible.
With American frustrations approaching breaking point, at long last on April the 1st, 1980, President Bani Sadr made a speech promising the hostages would be handed over to his government for release.
آقای خمینی تغییر رأی دادن، باز آزاد نشدن. چندین نوبت، یعنی حدود 40 نوبت این در این مدت قضیه رسید به حل، به هر بار این حل از بین رفت.
The fact that Bani Sadr had made these statements and then, to see Khomeini just kind of pull the rug out of these people that was supposedly the elected leadership of their country meant that we really were dealing with Khomeini, and we had no real communication with him at all.
This lays bare the full responsibility of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Revolutionary Council. It must be made clear that the failure to release the hostages will involve increasingly heavy costs to Iran and to its interests.
We didn't know if our people would be there forever. So just a bleak feeling about the future of our people, concern about their health, their physical and mental health. A feeling that our country was being humiliated, which was true, and a feeling that we had to do something.
We will continue to consult with our allies and other friendly governments on the steps we are now taking and on additional measures which may be required.
3 days later, on April the 10th, 1980, President Carter secretly gave the go-ahead for a rescue mission. But another mission was on its way. With the secret rescue force poised for action, the mother of a hostage found her way to Tehran on an extraordinary personal quest.
It was when I received the one and only letter that I received from Kevin. That was, I believe it was in February, that said that he had made an escape attempt and that he would die trying to escape rather than stay there. And at that point, I just, every maternal instinct within me just told me that I would go. We were taken to the embassy, and I was very frightened. Very, very frightened. But I just knew I needed to see Kevin.
One noon hour, they walked into my room and told me that I was going to meet my mom.
It was so awful, and I walked in the room, and they had these television cameras or cameras set up, and there were about 20 Iranians, and they all had guns pointed.
You can imagine how shocked I was when they took me into another room, and there she was.
I embraced him, and I started to cry.
We embraced and we talked. It was very surreal.
And he whispered in my ear that I had to be very careful what I said, because there was this big bowl of roses that was on the table, And he said that was bugged and that there were microphones all over. So it was like all pretend visit. I mean, my heart was going inside of him. I just knew that I just needed to project my love to him.
I spent a lot of time with my mom talking about my family, my brothers and sisters, talking about my high school sports team. I was only a couple of years out of high school anyway. What was going on with the Milwaukee Brewers ball team and all the other things that were going on back in Wisconsin.
That was probably the worst time that I ever had in my whole life, was to leave. I had 4 younger children back home that I had to go home to. But knowing that I had to leave him behind me and not know what they were going to do to him, it was very, very difficult.
The bold and hazardous rescue plan began with a night rendezvous of 8 helicopters from an aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean. They would meet up with C-130 refueling planes at a remote location in the desert south of Tehran. From there, the helicopters would lift the Delta Special Forces to a hideout close to the city. Finally, the Delta Squad would storm the embassy and free the hostages before a helicopter rescue from a nearby sports stadium.
We were, of course, having to go through the pretense of a normal day because there were only 3 or 4 of us in the White House that knew about it, the President, the Vice President, Brzezinski, and myself.
Well, the lead C-130, which is the one I was in, crossed the coast of Iran there between 2 radar sites at very low level. And we crossed simultaneously with the 8 helicopters that launched from the aircraft carrier Nimitz, which was about 50 miles offshore to the south.
But soon problems began. 2 of the helicopters abandoned the mission through mechanical failure and weather problems. By the time Colonel Kyle's lead refueling plane reached the desert landing site, the rescuers had the bare minimum of 6 helicopters needed to press on to Tehran.
So when we landed pretty hard, by the way, too, but the airplane just shook, rattled, and rolled a little bit, and up we went, and everybody offloaded. But here comes a bus, a big Mercedes bus, driving right into the middle of our operation.
To add to the burden of guarding 45 frightened bus passengers, the rescuers now had to deal with the arrival of a rogue Iranian fuel truck. They blew up the truck, but had to inform the White House that the driver had escaped.
We still are watching our clocks real close to make sure we're going to be able to complete this refueling, load Delta, and get the forces inserted before sunrise. There was a certain amount of trepidation, obviously, at everything that had gone grossly wrong at this point. Colonel Beckwith was a ground commander, and he said, "Hey, one of these helicopters is shutting down. I've got 20 of my shooters on there. You speak their language. Go find out for me what's happening." So I looked down there, and sure enough, I could see the blades hanging limply on it's a number 2 helicopter. So now we only have 5 helicopters. Well, we know from all of our computations that we're in an abort situation.
Faced with the inevitable, Carter aborted the mission and ordered the force to leave.
It was terribly, terribly disappointing to know that it had not been successful. And then to get the call, number 1, that it had not worked. Number 2, that there had been a terrible accident in Desert One and innocent American lives had been lost.
Well, this is my version of what I saw. Fine powdery dust in the desert just kicks up in a dust storm in an instant. The pilot had vertigo, and the helicopter got away from him, and he crashed, he thought, in a left turn out into the desert. But in actuality, he came down right on top of one of the C-130s, and I mean smack on top of it. So we lost 8 people there, and it just a snap of your fingers, from an event that looked perfectly normal 1 minute to a catastrophe.
His instinct was immediately that we had to go public with this, but he was devastated. He was devastated.
It was my decision to attempt the rescue operation. It was my decision to cancel it when problems developed in the placement of our rescue team for a future rescue operation. The responsibility is fully my own. In the aftermath of the attempt, we continue to hold the government of Iran responsible for the safety and for the early release of the American hostages who have been held so long.
The whole episode was foolish. And that added fuel to the fire. That showed that even the Americans, they don't want to resolve the problem through the nonviolent and negotiation. They don't hesitate to use force in order to resolve the problem.
به نظر ما اقدام امریکا برای حمله به طبس خیلی سنگین بود. یعنی اصلا قابل مقایسه نبود با کاری که ما کرده بودیم. او به راحتی قوانین بین‌المللی رو نقض کرده بود و با نیروی نظامی به کشور ما حمله کرده بود. حتی هواپیماهاش وارد حریم یک کشور مستقل شده بودند. شاید حالا بهانه او یه بهانه مثلا انسان دوستانه‌ای بود که میخواست برای آزادی گروگان‌ها این کار رو بکنه. اما تمامی برنامه که تهیه شده بود توسط امریکایی‌ها یک حرکت تجاوزگرانه بود.
Within hours, the hostages were dispersed to secret locations in every corner of Iran.
After the rescue attempt, we were shipped off in these vans, and I felt like I was a piece of poultry.
Blindfolded, leg irons, the whole bit. All the way I'm listening to the truck when it was going uphill, so I knew we were heading toward the mountains from Tehran.
And for the next 6 hours, we traveled through the mountains of northeastern Iran to a small isolated village, which we later learned was only about 20 miles from the Soviet border.
For the next 3 months, the hostages were held in remote, improvised prisons. The Shah died at last in Egypt, but negotiations languished as the captors grew as weary as their hostages.
I used to wake up every morning and make myself say, this is ridiculous. These people are stuck with us. We're stuck with them. They don't know what to do with us. And that kind of cheered me up momentarily as I woke up after another dreary day and night.
تعبیر زیبایی است که ما هم گروگان اون گروگان ها بودیم. ولی خب ما برای یک هدف انسانی و دفاع از منافع یک ملت اون گروگان ها برای جواب پس دادن از طرف حکومتی که اونها اصلا بنده های خدا در شاید اون به هر حال اهداف سهمی نمی داشتند. گروگان ها ابزار دست حکومت امریکا بودند. ما هم به هر حال ابزار دست یک ملت بودیم.
And sometimes they'd sit there for hours asking me about the states and things like that. And, I mean, some of them were so naive. They'd say, do you think when this thing's over, do you think I could go to school in the States? Oh, sure. You know, when's it going to be over?
من ترم تحصیلیم رو حذف کردم. من و همه بچه‌های دیگه‌ای که با هم در صحنه لاین جاسوسی حضور داشتیم. و اصلا احساس ناراحتی نمی‌کردم از اینکه چه این کاری دارم انجام میدم. و حاضر بودم که 1 سال دیگه همین کار رو ادامه بدم.
I had deep and utter hatred for them, and they had mutual hatred for me. And I think it was built on the fact that I felt that I was betrayed by them, and they treated us so inhumanely. And I always had this picture of Iranians being not that way.
I don't agree with what they did. But on the other hand, they managed to keep us alive throughout that entire period, and I don't think they did that bad a job.
the summer of 1980, the hostages were moved back to Tehran, to prison.
When we finally got into Comité prison, that was another low point in that sense, because, geez, how long is this thing going to go on? Here we are, where they're institutionalizing this thing to the point where we're going into one of the toughest prisons in the country.
We spent 6 months in an Iranian prison, full-fledged, honest-to-goodness, gray-walled, steel-barred prison with good steel doors to it. And you lie there on the floor with about a half inch of rubber matting, looking at a bulb that's on 24 hours a day, with nothing to do in your life except to go to the bathroom.
This blood-curdling scream just came out of no place. There were 4 of us in this cell, and we all woke up and looked at each other. That was probably the second most frightening day of my life, because someone was being tortured, and this went on 24 hours a day.
Iranians had blocked up all the windows. There was a fan with louvers, and the louver and the fan somehow, and the light from the sun reflected a tree that was outside the building. And there, on this tree, was a bird. And this bird would visit me every afternoon at a certain time. He was upside down, of course, because of the reflection and refraction. And there we were together. He was chirping, and I was looking. We had nothing. It's all we had together. That was our relationship. But that what gave me the most pleasure, I would say, in the 14 and a half months of my captivity. That's not much, you have to understand. But it meant a lot. He meant a lot to me. And then when he left one day and didn't come back, I was heartbroken.
On September 22nd, 1980, Iraq invaded Iran. Soon the two countries were locked in a savage conflict which was to slaughter millions of their young men. As the Iranian martyrs piled up, Khomeini grew desperate for the arms and assets locked away in America.
اول جنگم آقای خمینی خیلی ترسش گرفت از اینکه این سبب بشود که ایران از بین بره. پس زود موافقت کرد که مسئله حل بشه.
But mutual suspicions, tortuous negotiations, and internal Iranian wrangling were to delay the release for another 4 months. And always there was Khomeini's implacable vendetta against Carter.
I think the impetus for it starting back up was the Ayatollah trying to connect the hostages again to Carter's election and trying to help defeat Carter.
The Khomeini said Shah must go, Shah has gone. Khomeini has said Carter must go, Carter must go. They wanted to show that, yes, a third world country like Iran would make a decision for American people who should be the president.
The people of the United States have made their choice, and of course I accept that decision. But I have to admit, not with the same enthusiasm that I accepted the decision 4 years ago.
With Carter's defeat, the negotiations for the release of the hostages at last began in earnest. For 10 weeks, Algerian intermediaries shuttled back and forth, trying to establish an agreement. Before Christmas 1980, the hostages were moved out of prison and prepared for release.
When the Algerian diplomats came to see us, I thought that something was going on here. We were transported from a prison to a very nice, comfortable, more or less comfortable place. I think it was a propaganda move on the Iranian part so that the Algerians wouldn't really see what type of lifestyle we were living in.
We had our little cursory physicals, and they brought me in a newspaper, you know, sort of like, hey, it hasn't been that bad, has it? You know, haven't you really enjoyed this? You know, oh, sure.
The Iranians came in, dragged us into a room where we were videotaped and told to tell the videotape how well we were treated.
There's going to be a lot of propaganda on what has happened to you here. And they want to direct it in such a way to show to everyone that, for example, you've been brainwashed, you've been tortured, you've been bothered. You have been brainwashed?
No, we haven't. And when I get to wherever we're going to be going after here, I'm just going to tell it realistic, like it was.
They wanted me to make a statement saying that my stay with them had been very pleasant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I told them, I says, look, I don't care. And these are my exact words. I don't care if you had kept me in the Tehran Hilton with dancing girls. You still kept me against my will.
One of the guards came in and said, all right, let's go. And we said, where? He said, you're going home. And nobody looked at anybody else.
They had never said they were going to take us home before, but we had been moved often enough that we were very, very suspicious, and so we took as much with us as we could.
I said, tell you what, I'm going to pack my bag here. I'm an American diplomat, and I'm not leaving here looking the way I look now. I came in here wearing a suit. I want you to, in shoes, they'd taken my shoes away from me quite a while ago. And I said, I want you to go find me my suit and my shoes, and then I will be ready to go.
And we were taken outside blindfolded, led to a bus. I did not know whether we were going to yet another prison or if we were indeed going to the airport.
Well, that trip to the airport could have been a very fateful one, was a very nervous one. There were elements out there within the student group that were determined not to let us go, hold on to this political bag that they were enjoying, if you will.
The bus was driven through the streets of Tehran.
We sat there, it seemed like an interminable period of time, traveling on bumpy roads.
One of the guards from the bus said, shut up. And then in Persian he said, Badar Sukhtay Amerikai, which means you bastard American. So in Persian I just told him to shut up himself, you son of an Iranian whore. And he took umbrage. They hauled me off the bus, beat me up a bit, and the bus left. And there I was, realizing I had probably made a mistake.
The only thing really downhill in Tehran and out in the distance is the airport. And we heard the jet engines of the planes that later would be flying us to freedom. We heard, as we drove nearer to the plane, a more deafening noise even than the aircraft engines, and that was the crowd.
One of the dreams that I used to dream was being released. So I had actually gone to the airport. I had gone through this many times in my dreams.
At the speed of light, I remember running through what was a gauntlet. People pushing at us, throwing things, kicking at us, spitting on us, jeering at us. Yankee, go home.
They were yelling Magbar America, death to America. And at the same time, they were spitting at me. as I lifted the spit off my face, I happened to see this wave, someone waving at me, and it happened to be an Algerian steward. But to me, it looked like someone saying, you know, you're free.
It was had some joy to see everyone again.
And we each basically ran into each other's arms and we hugged each other. We were shaking hands. There were tears streaming down faces.
And we started to hug each other and kiss and cry. This feeling of overwhelming joy that one only experiences a few times in one's life.
Everybody was trying to remember people's names. It was like a college reunion because we hadn't known each other that well to begin with. And people slapping each other on the back.
Tremendous. It was party time. It really was. We talked a mile a minute. I was trying to catch up on how one had been treated and what was happening, and everybody had two questions. Are you okay? And is everybody here?
I went out in a Mercedes-Benz, sitting in the back seat with a Revolutionary Guard chauffeur and another guard in front, all the way out to the airport by Mercedes. It's the only way to leave.
Both planes at the end of the runway.
Do you know if the presumption of hostages are on?
Don't know.
Don't know.
We'll let you know when to take off, but it's close.
It was surreal. It was unbelievable that it was happening to us, that this thing that had been a part of our lives for a year was maybe about to be over.
We were waiting for any kind of a response. We knew the deal had been done, the Iranians had accepted it, the money had been transferred, everything had happened, and we were simply waiting for a sign that they were going to follow through on what they had agreed to do.
The hostages were on the plane, that the plane was on the runway in Tehran, talking to President Carter in the car while he was riding down with President Reagan. And then, of course, our hope was that they'd be released on our watch. We had gotten our people out and we had completed the task. And, of course, even that was to be denied us.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And they waited until President Reagan had taken the oath of office, at which point they immediately released the hostages within 5 minutes.
There was a lot of apprehension during that time we were still in Iranian airspace that a wild Iranian aircraft fighter pilot would turn his jet on our plane.
And the Algerian captain said, "We're now leaving Iranian airspace." And at that time, I felt that we were free. But it still could have been a dream.
We were given quite a decent Veuve Clicquot. And it was a very private moment. I drank a toast to myself.
I had received word officially for the first time that the aircraft carrying the 52 American hostages had cleared Iranian airspace on the first leg of a journey home, and that every one of the 52 hostages was alive, was well, and free.
Germany was sort of like every happy Christmas you ever had.
I got to Wiesbaden not knowing anything about the emotion that people in America felt. I had no idea.
I called directly home to Barbara and the kids. It was one of these things that, how do you really communicate this feeling of love and loss to someone from this distance and this time warp, the time that we lost, that both of us lost. It's almost an impossible thing.
What do you say over the telephone? Hello, how are you? You know, a stupid question. What do you mean? How am I? Now I'm happy. You know, I was in Iran, and it was terrible. And it's how much can you say?
I finally got to Louisa. She had gone to stay with friends because the pressure of TV and all that was getting to be too much. And she said I had to leave my house and go stay with these friends. And I said, "What do you mean your house? I paid for that house." And marriage was off to a good start again.
We all got back together, you know, one last time to go see the hostages. And we went over there. We were excited about it. We were also nervous and uptight about it. There was some tough questions. But it was a very, very emotional time. There were people in that room that hated Jimmy Carter.
All of us respectful of the fact that here was the previous president of the United States just out of office. We owed him enormous respect. And we also, many of us, however, sensed that here was the man who in effect had contributed to our situation, or at least was responsible for our situation.
Undoubtedly, we cost him his presidency. But I know when he said to me personally that he would rather have me alive than being president of the United States, that he really meant it.
Carter expected to be thanked for getting us out, and we just knew him as the man who'd gotten us in. Having said that, and I really want to make this point, I think we owe our lives to Jimmy Carter.
We'd all been collectively holding our breath for so long that this was just a mighty, it's over.
I remember embracing Bruce and how thin he was. He was like, just had lost so much weight. It was like holding on to a boy, you know. And when he came off the plane and he just, you know, held us all three of us, and everybody's standing there crying because there are no words.
It was like having a bath in love.
America was looking for a reason to be proud, or a reason to be American again. We had lost it.
The American people were looking for a release at that time. We had our release from captivity. The American people used our release from captivity to release itself of this burden of Vietnam.
If our return meant anything, it meant that perhaps we could put aside some of the problems and fissures within American society for a while.
And here were the hostages coming home and symbolizing failure in many ways. Nonetheless, a sense of relief felt by the American people as a whole, who were all hostage to that drama, that it was over finally.
They were making heroes out of us, and I kept thinking of the stories of the Roman legions when the legionnaires would come back and their senior officers would be feted with a big parade through the Avenue of Heroes. and they'd be on their chariots listening to the exulting masses cheer them on and everything, and always there was a representative of the emperor's office behind them whispering in their ear, "All glory is fleeting." So I knew that was a celebration not for us, really. We were symbols. We were the icons of America's involvement in one of the most unpleasant, frustrating years this country had ever been involved in. And that was all we were. It could have been 52 other people, and it would have come out just exactly the same.
In Tehran, another anniversary demonstration outside the former American embassy winds down. For a generation born since the revolution, the old images keep alive the specter of the old enemy. Two decades on, the hostage crisis still casts a long shadow over the two nations, the way they see themselves and one another.
More and more, Iran in its relationship with the world and the West has shown that a country can stay independent and remain independent, and it doesn't need necessarily to submit to the pressures of a superpower.
در حقیقت می شود گفت که اون بنبستی که در حال حاضر بین ایران و آمریکا در برقراری روابط مجدد وجود دارد، این از آثار دراز مدت همون حرکت انقلابی دانشجویان است.
It created a negative image about Iranian revolution outside. Iranian revolution was an Islamic one, and Islam is asking for peace, for brotherhood. So all of a sudden there is a government in Iran claiming to be Islamic and yet treating the foreign objects in that way. That was not a good way to present yourself.
من اگه یک گروگان امریکایی رو الان ببینم هیچ احساس خاصی نداشته باشم. یعنی اساساً فکر میکنم تصرف سفارت امریکا یک حادثه ایست متعلق به زمانی. اصلا لازم نیست دیگه تکرار بشه. یعنی نمیتونه تکرار بشه. همه چیز داره عوض میشه.
There was a time when Iran had to reassert itself and be Iran, and we were a vehicle for that. We've got to realize that out there are a lot of people who don't wish us well. And that's very important thought at all times, and one that Americans have a very hard time swallowing.